Okay guys, here we are again. This is a Giant Stance E+2, so we're looking at a full suspension e-bike today. This is a 2021 model. First up, changes over last year. This year's Stance is a 29er. Last year was basically an almost plus bike, 27.5 but 2.6 I believe. We're looking at a bike with 120 millimeters of rear suspension, 130 millimeter travel fork. This is using Giant single pivot design as opposed to the Maestro suspension. That's something that Giant does on their bikes that they're trying to achieve a little bit more of a budget price point. It still works really well. It pedals efficiently. It's just not quite as complex a thing to manufacture. Less pivots, all that sort of stuff to worry about. Some of the stuff on here to look at, basically being an e-bike, we have two different things to talk about. We have the conventional bike parts to talk about and the stuff that makes it an e-bike. So the bicycle components, we've got things like the Shimano Deore 1x10 drivetrain. This is a brand new 2021 level of Deore, which means that it can actually take an 1146 cassette. So this does have a broader range of gears than last year's bike. We've got Maxxis Recon tires on here. They're tubeless ready tires, but they're not set up tubeless. They're 29 by 2.4, and that's both front and rear. We have, when it comes to suspension, a RockShox Monarch R rear shock. So that's a fairly simple air shock with rebound adjustment. So you can adjust the air pressure to match with your body weight and to get the proper amount of suspension for you. And then you adjust the rebound afterwards so that your bike isn't a pogo stick or not packing down with a soft rebound. On the front end, we're looking at a Suntour XCR 34 Air LOR is what they would call it. So what those different things mean are the XCR 34 means we're looking at something with a 34 millimeter stanchion, so that's how fat that tube is, 34 millimeters. The LOR means that we've got a lockout on here. Will they auto adjust or auto focus? Actually zoom in on that. There's a lockout there, and then that side, that is an air cap, so it's an air suspension fork, and it has a through axle. You'll notice we leave that tag on there because this Suntour through axle uses their Q-lock system, which is a really nice system, but it really leaves some people puzzled, so we leave that tag on there because it helps us or reminds us to talk with customers about that. We've got some big brake rotors on here. So Tektro Orion brakes. They're a 4-piston brake, one that we've actually had some staff members actually use, and that is a 203 millimeter rotor. Fairly long brake levers, so we run those inboard a little bit, just so you can still do single finger braking. That same brake is on the back here as well. For some other details, it's a quick release on the back, unlike that through axle on the front. You've got a narrow wide style chainring on here. Obviously, being an e-bike, this is a much bigger chainring than what would be on an analog bike. You've got a nice, comfy Giant saddle on here. A little bit more padding, I think, than what was on here last year. It seems like so long since we saw last year's bikes. It's memory goes way back. We've got lock-on grips on both sides. This shows what your controller looks like on many of the Giant e-bikes. These guys are simple. You have two different light bars. Right now you can see that it's lit up on the right. That is showing your battery power. On the left, it's showing the light in the middle. That is actually showing that you're in an auto assist sort of mode. But you do have the amount of assistance the electric motor is giving you is all defined by that up and down button there. And of course you still have, I'll just turn that off. You still also have your 10 gears here, so the one thing we notice some e-bike riders forget that they've got gears, they just play with the electric assist. But you still want to use those two things with each other. We've got a standard seat post on here, but this is set up that you can do internal cable routing for a dropper seat post, and it's a standard 30.9 diameter seat post, so it's an easy and common upgrade. The pedals that come with this bike are an embarrassment, but these days it's either no pedals or cheap pedals seems to be the way bike companies are going, knowing that people all have preferences and pedals have become the place that people look forward to sort of blinging out their bike. Getting into some of the more e-bike specific stuff, inside there is of course the electric motor. Giant pretty much works exclusively with Yamaha on their motors. This big fat down tube houses a battery that when you use the key in that keyhole there, you can drop that battery out. The removable battery is basically going to help you if you have to transport the bike, or if you're going to keep the bike in a garage over the winter, that you can take your battery indoors and not have it negatively affected by cold temperatures, which we have here in Canada. When it comes to the motor on this guy, or the battery at least, is a 500 watt-hour battery, so a pretty decent sized battery. One with the new fast smart charger that comes with these guys, you can basically get that charged to 80% within 2.5 hours. The drive system on here is 70 Newton meters. It's one of the things that changes a little bit when you step up to, say, the Giant Trance, being the fancier full suspension above this. It goes to an 80 Newton meter. So that's how much torque you get, roughly associated with, or basically associated with how much acceleration you're going to get out of the bike. Still, of course, with this class of e-bike, it's not a throttle, it's pedal assist. It's only going to amplify the power you put in. You'll max out at 360% support. So that means for every watt of power you put in, you could potentially be getting 3.6 watts of output. And the typical thinking on these guys is you're going to be able to get somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 100 kilometers of riding. So you'll have a pretty full day out on here. Other things to mention when you're talking about the stance are the geometry numbers on this bike. This is not a super progressive bike as far as geometry numbers, and that is a good thing in this case. And that is because they're not imagining this going under a super hardcore rider who is a very skilled high-speed bike handler. They want to give bike handling characteristics that are going to be a little bit more neutral, and even that go along with things like the fact that we've got these Recon tires being a good knobby tire but not an aggressive knobby tire. They're imagining the user for this bike probably being one who spends maybe half their time riding the mountain bike trails on this, and the rest of the time it's just going to be an extra comfortable pathway bike or bike to get around. So we're not talking hardcore mountain bike, we're talking a bike for somebody who's going to be doing some good mountain biking, but also just wants an e-bike for everyday use. One of the nice things when you've got the electric assistance on these bikes is it's not your energy that's going to be wasted if once in a while you're blasting around town with this guy. And of course the phone rings while we're talking about this, and somebody picked it up nice and fast, so that's good. This guy in Canada, so you know, $41.99 for something that comes with a really reputable motor and battery, good components, that Deore 1x10, which I absolutely love, with some good brakes that we actually have tried and used ourselves in the shop and are pretty impressed by. This is a really impressive setup. One last thing I'll also mention on here, I talked about that auto feature. Part of that makes it work really well is the fact that there are 6 sensors within this that will tell anything from your bike speed to how much power you're putting down to your actual pedaling cadence, as well as the incline of the bike. And it's taking all of that, feeding it into an algorithm to give you really smooth, predictable electric assistance. If you can imagine the power of your electric motor just randomly kicking in and not being smooth or predictable, and you're riding on technical trails, it would be a nightmare. You would be smashing into trees and going over things at a speed you're not comfortable with. In this case here, you're getting a really, really reliable, predictable bike that you can enjoy and you can get into riding more and more mountain bike trails on. So this is the 2021 Stance E+2 29.